Daniel says, what's the most important habit that you built between the ages of 18 to 21 that gave you a lifelong advantage? Well, it's different. It's impossible for me to measure any lifelong advantages because probably the only habit is just working 12 hours a day, really. You know, I could sit and say meditation or cold showers or reading or the mindset stuff. The only thing that mattered was just doing the work and working, 11, 12 hours a day nonstop, and building that sort of work ethic habit. So probably that, man. I don't think it goes much deeper than that. Like every other habit you do should be to facilitate the habit of work. So like in my instance, I was like, I need to work 12 hours a day to get this done. So if I took cold showers, it was so that I could like shower less so I could work more. If I read, it was so that I could be better at work. If I meditated, it was so I could be more focused. If I did the mindset stuff, it was so I could be encouraged to work. How do you stay focused for so many hours? Do you take any supplements? Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of the opposite of supplements. So I don't have any caffeine or nicotine in my life. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't do the snooze thing, the thing you put in your lips. I don't supplement. The only things that I supplement every day are creatine, magnesium citrate, and vitamin D. And those are the only 3 things that I supplement. And then maybe some electrolytes if I'm like feeling a bit dehydrated. But they're unflavored and that's nothing. But the way that you stay focused for so many hours is just by practicing being focused for that many hours. And, you want to learn to install focus and that sort of art of doing one thing at a time everywhere, and then it will just become your natural mode of behavior. So like right now, for example, I'm on this live stream. If I was to share my screen with you guys, the only thing I have open here, literally I'm just checking, is the stream and nothing else. And there's no distractions, there's no notifications. Everything I do, whether it's a meeting, a live stream, a piece of content, an ad, anything, is all just done without any distractions. If I'm at dinner with my parents, it's just the dinner. And when you learn to just do one thing at a time everywhere else personally, when you sit down to work, it's significantly easier. Is it important to fully eliminate all possibilities, to go after urges, or focus more on pure discipline? Well, I can tell you, man, that it is so much easier. Look, discipline manifests itself in 2 forms. The first form is resisting impulse. And the second form is doing something difficult. So when you think about it, like it takes discipline to get up and go to the gym, or it takes discipline to meditate, or it takes discipline to go for a run. That's the hard part, discipline. But the other discipline is not eating the cake in the kitchen, or, not going on some video game that you've got. So it's kind of like you need to attack it from both angles. And my favorite method for building discipline to begin with is because you only have such a finite amount of discipline. And so when you remove all the environmental triggers that give the impulse possibility to manifest, like if you've got a packet of cigarettes in your flat, you're going to want to smoke them. If you've got like an Xbox in your bedroom, you're going to want to play on it. And so when you have those things in your environment, you're constantly straining yourself to not do them, so that when it comes to doing the hard things, you've kind of depleted and you've sort of depleted your disciplinary reserves, and then getting to the gym or working hard becomes more difficult because the 80% of your disciplinary energy is being spent on impulse control as opposed to building something that's hard. And so like I always think the first place to focus is definitely on your environment and eliminating any possibilities that your discipline can sort of be tested in your environment. How can I overcome a dopamine addiction that keeps me from working 12 hours? Well, the first thing to realize is that you're not addicted to dopamine, because if that was true, then we'd all be fucked. You're addicted to something that triggers a anticipatory response that gives you instant gratification. And so, if you want to basically regulate your dopamine and sort of recontrol it, then you start by looking at all the behaviors in your life, whether it's vaping, drinking, gaming, porn, junk food. Look at the things that bring you great joy in anticipation of doing them. And that's a sign that a very strong a very strong dopamine response to a stimulus is when you're really looking forward to it. And if it's obviously particularly unhealthy, right? and then just remove those things from your life. And also as well, I don't think that your dopamine addiction keeps you from working 12 hours. I think that's just a coping mechanism that you've created as some form of resistance. Like you're using this idea of your dopamine addiction as a shield to avoid doing the work. I know people that are like drug addicts and junk food addicts who are really fat and overweight that still make millions of dollars and still work really hard. You don't need to have your dopaminergic system perfectly attuned and in check to warrant and permit you working hard. It just makes it significantly easier. So I would also suggest that you stop coping there, Gene, as well. How does being in ketosis help your cognitive ability? I spent 2 years in ketosis. And I've now sort of returned to eating fruit, which obviously means I'm no longer in ketosis. And I see very little difference in focus and performance. Ketosis definitely, like my first 6 months on carnivore was definitely some of the most focused work I've ever done. However, the primary reason for my clarity of mind and ability to focus and cognitive ability was because I had just drastically reduced all of the inflammation in my body and repaired my gut. And so it's not necessarily it's not the state of ketosis or the state of glycosis. Your metabolic state doesn't necessarily determine your cognitive ability. It's more your inflammation, your brain fog, your hormone management, your testosterone, and all those things that come as a result of potentially eating foods that keep you in ketosis. So the actual metabolic state doesn't necessarily give you that stuff, but you can get this real deep sense of primal focus when you're fasted or specifically on carnivore. But usually it only lasts for a couple of months, and then it sort of diminishes off into something that's not as powerful, so to speak. But I've kind of found that as long as you don't eat processed sugar, and as long as you don't eat seed oils, and as long as you don't eat dairy and gluten, you're usually going to be 80% of the way there to having all the cognitive ability you could need to become a millionaire. The last time I felt anxiety, no, not that I can recall. I used to feel anxious a lot in school, when I was like a teenager growing up. I felt a lot of anxiety about my place in the world and, people being mean to me and shit in school and all those things. But yeah, honestly, man, no, I don't really feel anxious anymore. I feel very calm. Like my consistent state of being in the world is pretty steady and just calm. And I honestly attribute the majority of that to my diet, eating really clean, sleeping really consistently, not drinking coffee, not drinking alcohol, not intaking nicotine. Like when you think about our bodies and the way they're tuned, they're really tuned to just deal with basic single ingredient foods and lots of water. And so that's kind of the, anxiety and depression and all these other sort of mental illnesses that people have are basically just sort of symptoms. It's your body sort of screaming at you that you're doing something wrong. And I think that if you try to live like a caveman, and I don't mean in a cave, but I mean like in terms of your consumption, if you try to live like someone who lived, 100,000 years ago or whatever the hell, on the African plains, you'd probably find that your body will just naturally tune up and the anxiety goes away. That's always been my experience. In being able to achieve that sort of zen, like calm state where nothing really phases you and everything's always going to be okay. It's a great thing. It's a great skill to develop as well. Do you take cold showers? Yes, I do. I've been taking cold showers pretty much every day for quite a few years now. I really like them because like a cold shower in the morning, like it forces you to get straight into that, like, let's go and fuck some shit up mode. Because like I've been doing cold showers every day for a long time, and I'll still turn the shower on, especially now in the UK in November, it's really cold, and I'll turn the shower on and I know it's going to be cold, and like I still have that sort of like, oh, I don't want to get in, and then I get in, and that feeling, that overcoming that sort of pain and like that pain tolerance barrier, has been really helpful. Like doing that every morning for like years on end. It makes you very familiar. Like When it's the first thing you do in the morning, it's great because you wake up, you brush your teeth, you turn the cold shower on, and the very first action you do in the morning is facing some pain. And that's a pretty good thing to do, because then everything else throughout the day doesn't really seem that painful, because there's not much that hurts more in your average day-to-day life than a cold shower. Does eating steak or beef every day give you cancer? I can't get consistent advice because people don't want to. Well, my opinion of this argument is no. I don't think red meat does give you cancer. Look, first of all, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a health professional, and you should all be very aware of that. So whenever I give you diet advice or make claims that certain things aren't carcinogenic, that doesn't mean it's true. It just means it's my perception of the truth, which isn't always right. However, let's critically think this through for a second here. The human body evolved in alignment with herd animals. And what that means is that the most bioavailable form of fuel for our bodies would have been herd animals that we would have chased around and hunted around on the African plains when we were evolving. And so we would have eaten a lot of bison, which is red meat. Okay, it's basically just a cow, but in a different form. And so the human body evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to consume nothing but red meat and the occasional berry. And when people say that red meat gives you cancer, I'd ask why, because carcinogens are typically things that you consume or that come into contact with organs in your body that are foreign and that your body doesn't know how to deal with. But I struggle to understand why it would give you cancer if your body has basically evolved to eat it, because that's all that was bioavailable to us. Sure, we'd have had some honey here and there and some blueberries every now and then and some other berries and some shit like that and whatever the hell and some sweet potato in the ground. But 80% of our food, 90% was red meat, and it was fatty red meat. And so if red meat gave us cancer consistently, it would have been impossible for human beings to evolve because they would have died of cancer. That's my opinion. That's what I consume for the most part.